Signor Presidente, caro Professore Meloni, Eminences, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and a privilege for me to have been invited to give the opening speech at this year's G20 Interfaith Forum. This forum has established itself as one of the key platforms for dialogue within and between religious communities, as well as between representatives of religious and political circles. It seems that this dialogue could not have come at a time more critical than now. This year's forum is dedicated to healing the wounds of society. In my speech, I would like to highlight the importance of dialogue in this very process. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the wounds of society that badly needs to be healed is its divisions, dividedness. Here, I primarily have in mind the political and ideological rift. This phenomenon arises when the usual political and ideological differences evolve into structured divisions, and when this dividedness and divisions prevents us from reaching a consensus or at least a good compromise. One of the principal reasons for this is the deteriorating quality of dialogue. A dialogue, at least in my view, should have at least the following three dimensions. One, a presentation of one's own view. Listening and a respectful criticism of another's view. And C, number three, a willingness to reconcile those two views. Political and ideological differences are therefore not a problem. The problem is the dwindling sense of responsibility to confront and reconcile them in a tolerant and inclusive way. Recently, the general understanding of dialogue has become restricted to the right to express one's views. And there is no sense of respect for different points of view, of considering them and making an effort to reconcile them. Such a deterioration and lack of understanding of dialogue only underlines the growing political and ideological differences. This gives rise to a rift in society and makes it increasingly impossible to consider and reconcile different views. Through hate speech without recognizing the responsibility for reconciliation, political and ideological differences cause a rift in society. This increases the risk of serious social conflict. We need to breathe new life into dialogue as a way of confronting and reconciling different views. We need to raise the level of the culture of dialogue, which has dangerously deteriorated with the widespread intolerant, offensive, and even, as I said, hate speech. Without this, the risk making democratic decision-making less effective and dangerously losing people's trust in democratic institutions. We must therefore do whatever it is in our power to emphasize the value of dialogue, respect for and consideration of different opinions and their reconciliation. Constructive cooperation is possible only through such a dialogue. Cooperation is the only way of reaching peaceful solution to all of our problems. Ladies and gentlemen, adherence to dialogue and cooperation has been and remains the guiding principle of consensual politics, which has recently found itself in serious crisis, both in the Western world and globally. It has its shortcomings. Sensible compromises that have been its hallmark have been replaced by senseless ones. This has damaged its credibility. People have become aware of this and started rejecting it, along with its excessive political correctness. This has given rise to divisive politics. Politics that makes no effort to overcome differences, but rather exploits them. Such politics builds upon disunity and fractures. This creates a situation where it is no longer noble to try to appeal to or even to cooperate with those who think differently. Moreover, it increasingly seems to be enough to appeal to your own supporters while stigmatizing or even excluding your rivals. Rifts in the society can only be overcome through the persistent and consistent pursuit of a dialogue that takes into account all of its three dimensions, including a respectful attitude and efforts to reconcile different views. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize that social media is not to blame for hate speech. The fact is that hate speech has existed before, and the sensitive relationship between freedom of speech and hate speech has been discussed before. However, hate speech is an enemy of the culture of dialogue, is something unbecoming, dangerous, and even forbidden. It is also a fact that with the advent of social media, hate speech has become much more widespread. The prevalence of hate speech on social media has a major impact on lowering the level of dialogue culture. The issue still lacks legal regulation. Until then, however, it will be necessary to resist the temptation to respond to intolerant, hostile, and hate speech in the same way according to the eye for an eye principle. I firmly believe that despite the spread of hate speech, most of our people remain moderate and tolerant of each other. They need to be won over to political views and beliefs or ideological views and beliefs with a high culture of dialogue. And not only that, it is the high culture of dialogue with which we will spread our political and ideological beliefs that will be a credible indicator of a true alternative to social division and hate speech as its agent. Ladies and gentlemen, I am an advocate of an inclusive society. This means that no one is excluded from the dialogue on all relevant social issues. In the context of this conference, I find it particularly worth emphasizing the benefit of dialogue between religions and between church and state. The constitutional principle of the separation of church and state does not prohibit constructive dialogue between the political institutions of the state and church's authorities. I believe that, particularly in the current situation, such a dialogue is of utmost importance. Open dialogue and day-to-day constructive coexistence can only further strengthen social cohesion and inclusion. In this regard, let me present the idea of a meeting of high representatives of different churches in the Western Balkans. You may be familiar with the fact that I have been co-leader, co-chairman of the Brdo-Briuni process ever since its establishment 11 years ago. It is an initiative involving all heads of states on the territory of former Yugoslavia and Albania, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Albania. The Brdo-Briuni process initiative is dedicated to accelerating the integration of the Western Balkans into the European Union, reconciliation, and a peaceful solution to all open issues. We are witnessing a situation in the region where it would be, at least in my view, extremely beneficial for high-level church representatives in this part of Europe to meet and consult on issues of reconciliation and coexistence as part of this initiative. I am very well aware that this is a very sensitive idea, very sensitive issue, and I have been discussing my idea with other leaders of the countries in the region with due sensitivity. But finally, I would like to share with you the feeling that the organization of such a conference, and in particular its possible conclusions, could make a significant contribution to the dialogue in the Western Balkans and consequently to a peace, security, and prosperity of the region. Ladies and gentlemen, I would once again like to thank you for your kind invitation and for your attention. Thank you so very much.